put it into context, moving from a standard gravel wheel to FKT is the equivalent of moving from a shallow climbing wheel on your road bike to a deep section front and a disc wheel at the rear. It's that material, it is noticeable, and it's going to change gravel racing. FKT is a really exciting new development project that we've been working on for the past 12 months. It's the first time that we are looking at aerodynamics and the impact it could have in gravel racing. As we're seeing in the gravel racing world, speeds are always on the up. Aerodynamics is playing an increasingly important part amongst racers when it comes down to their equipment selection. The difference between gravel and road racing, of course, is that a gravel tyre is going to have a tread pattern and it's going to be wider. So that has implications on the airflow and therefore what we need to do with rim design in order to recapture that airflow, keep it nice and stable, and obviously reduce drag. We know from previous testing that different treads have very different impacts on aerodynamics. So for this project, we thought it was going to be really important to make sure that we optimize around specific tread pattern or patterns. As a result, when we saw that Panoracer were going to be launching a new and updated version of their iconic Gravel King tyre, the X1 tread pattern, that really became the obvious choice for us in terms of marrying performance on the aerodynamic side with the tyre side of things. So we're working with Panoracer to really optimize around the X1, and after discussing with their experts, came to see that around about the 40mm tyre size was what was really going to be in the sweet spot for racing. In terms of the design process, we really had to go back to basics on this one. So going back to the NACA library of established aerodynamic profiles, we began looking at the ratio of thickness to depth on the ideal profile for something like this. What you see on that is that in order to deliver a rim depth that is going to optimize for something like a 40mm tyre, you're actually going to be going so much deeper than you would really be looking to run. So instead of looking at that sort of mid-depth wheel that is kind of ideal in terms of handling, performance and weight, you'd be looking at something far, far deeper, almost sort of a full disc level, which meant that we had to pivot slightly and think, what other technology can we use here to almost simulate the rim depth? So that's what led us to look at the virtual foil design. We've seen this in use on frames for some time, where you effectively truncate the foil depth. However, the difference with a wheel, and the problem that we've seen with a wheel, is that it rotates. So where on the one hand it will act as the trailing edge coming off of the tyre, as the wheel rotates, it then becomes the leading edge at the back end. So having something quite blunt pushing through the air has a significant aerodynamic penalty. So working through the design process, we're now launching FKT with a hybrid truncated virtual foil profile. So what I mean by that is that we are using that sort of shorter rim depth, that sort of shorter truncated foil design, but we still had to incorporate some leading edge aerodynamics to ensure that the rear of the wheel wasn't going to be a penalty. For the design process, this was another first for us. We started with our CAD design and then moved into the realms of 3D printing. So for the first time, we were using some 3D printed rims, more in terms of looking at the tyre fitment and the overall profile of how the tyre sits on our rim. This was then 3D scanned and used for CFD simulations. Again, a first for us. We've moved across to cloud computing on this, working in partnership with the AirShaper platform for our CFD testing. At that point, we started to get really excited because we were seeing some material differences between both tyre tread patterns, tyre sizes, and even rim profiles. Once we had the CFD results in, that gave us the confidence to then move ahead onto physical prototyping and ultimately ending up in the wind tunnel for a product validation and benchmarking process rather than using it all the way through the design process. This has allowed us to come to market a lot sooner with FKT and bring you as the rider all of the advantages far, far quicker than we would have done in the past. One of the interesting features about FKT is that unlike our Think Wider Aero road range, when we put our wind sensors onto bikes, we noticed that when riding in a gravel environment, there really wasn't such a marked difference in yaw angles seen between the front and the rear wheels. That's likely due to the slightly reduced speeds and even down to some extent the impact of the tyre tread on the airflow at the front and the rear wheels. So what you'll see with FKT is that we're now using a symmetrical front and rear rim design because we're optimizing for the same airflow conditions, front and rear. FKT has a hookless rim. The rationale for this is purely around the fact that we can use our Impact Plus gravel technology. This uses a slightly more flexible resin at the edge of the rim, which makes the rim harder wearing, more durable, and more impact resistant. It also delivers a slightly more compliant ride for you, the rider. And with gravel tyres, the pressures that you're running them at, we're confident in the hookless technology and all of the safety testing has been completed. It's also worth bearing in mind that with FKT, it has a 27mm internal rim width, which means that staying well within the ETRTO guidelines, that takes you all the way down to a smaller tyre size of 35mm and upwards of the 45 to 50mm tyres that we're starting to see in gravel racing. With FKT, what we now have is what we believe to be the first truly aerodynamically optimized wheel for gravel racing. So rather than in the past looking to minimize the damage to your aerodynamics from your gravel tyre, we're looking to really optimize around that. Prototypes have been out on the gravel race circuit under our partnered riders Maddie Nutt and Joe Laverick. We've seen the benefits in the wind tunnel, and we can say confidently that you will see an aerodynamic performance benefit from a 35mm tyre all the way through to 45mm and wider. All of the data is available on the website under the Frontier Workshop section, and we're going to be looking to go deeper and further into the gravel world as a result of what we've already learned. In terms of the aerodynamic performance benefit, to put it into context, moving from a standard gravel wheel to FKT is the equivalent of moving from a shallow climbing wheel on your road bike to a deep section front and a disc wheel at the rear. It's that material, it is noticeable, and it's going to change gravel racing.